I was bleeding out from this area under my eyes, bleeding out from my ears, and then bleeding in my brain.
Andy Ngo is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. He's been beaten, attacked, and nearly killed twice by Antifa for his reporting.
I hope my reporting and my suggestions can give investigators some potential ideas.
Trump recently designated the group as a domestic terror organization in an executive order and hosted a roundtable with Andy Ngo and other journalists who recounted their experiences.
You don't get that level of successful rioting without coordination. And they were clearly coordinated. They had flyers, where to come, where to go. People have died by radical leftists in the US.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Andy Ngo, such a pleasure to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you.
You were just at the White House roundtable on Antifa, and the AG Pam Bondi talked about, of course, it's been designated a domestic terrorist organization. She talked about taking it apart brick by brick, top to bottom. Kash Patel mentioned, the FBI director, that it had been built over a long period of time. How does one actually accomplish this?
It's going to be very, very difficult, not easy. I alluded to that in my comments to the president and members of his cabinet. Well, what the DOJ can do is there's several things. First, if they take on cases of criminal suspects who are engaging in federal crimes relating to rioting and other attacks, that then takes it out of the hands of local prosecutors generally, because local prosecutors aren't going to pursue charges against most of these riot cases, or they give them sweetheart plea deals where there's no really meaningful consequence, as we saw in 2020. There's that. So I'm not even talking about conspiracy charges or anything, just like assault, arson, charges that tax on federal officers. Like, there are federal crimes that can apply right now. You don't have to be very creative. But more meaningfully, taking it apart brick by brick, as you were just quoted them saying, I think the DOJ should use conspiracy charges. They have not used that at any point ever for suspects who are accused of being part of Antifa or committing in organized crimes in furtherance of the Antifa ideology. But it hasn't been done before at the state level. And the state of California versus 12 suspects, that was the case. And prosecutors in San Diego alleged that 12 members they had identified were part of SoCal Antifa, a regional cell in Southern California that included members in LA and Long Beach and San Diego, that they had conspired together to carry out violence and rioting on Pacific Beach in January 2021. On that day, groups of people came dressed in black with their faces covered, and they had melee weapons and projectile weapons, and they attacked violently people who were attending a pro-Trump rally. The violence was so unrestrained that the militants attacked members of the public on the beach, people who were walking their dogs, people who were walking nearby. This is during the middle of the day when there were people going to the beach, and they were affected by the mace and pepper spray. A woman was beaten to the ground. A teenage boy who was underage was assaulted, and there were numerous victims. A journalist was bashed on the back with some type of pole or a stick. And police were injured. And in this case, the majority of them were convicted of felony conspiracy. All 12 were convicted of something, by the way. And because it went to trial, the evidence came out, what the prosecutors had. They likely had one person out of the 12 cooperating. That's my belief. Recovered signal chats. Everyone had an alias. They coordinated who was coming together, who was leaving together, what cars, what to bring. And it showed that there were even some left-wing journalists who were in the signal chat who were there, by the way. None of that was particularly surprising to me. I knew all that. I wrote a book on Antifa called Unmasked. It was a New York Times bestseller. It came out in 2021. However, it was surprising in the context that this came out on the record in a criminal trial, finally. And of course, that case got no national media attention at all. So I think the DOJ can really look to that and see, because there are federal charges of conspiracy that can apply. Even more creatively, they could potentially even look at racketeering charges because of how some of the Antifa networks and cells organized. They operate as a gang, essentially. They have members, they coordinate together, they typically use Signal, and they have a plan and are instructed for how to destroy evidence as well. Now, where it gets more confusing or difficult, maybe from prosecutors' perspective, from law enforcement perspective, is how do you identify those who are in a cell versus somebody who shows up to riot and is not part of the network? There are certain ways to identify that, but the way that Antifa organizes, it's meant to appear as if there is no organization, but they are organized. I hope people don't forget what happened in 2020 when, for months, cities like Portland and Seattle and other places were besieged by nightly violence by Antifa. Individuals who all donned the same black uniform, showed up at the same time, dispersed together and carried out mass violence, and disappeared into the darkness of the night, and did it night after night after night, with local prosecutors essentially doing nothing. Even when police didn't make arrests, in the case of Portland, the district attorney there, Mike Schmidt, chose not to prosecute over 90% of them. His office, as soon as he came into power in August 2020, just had a whole list of riot-related crimes that he announced his office would not pursue charges on those who are charged with these.
Andy, we're going to take a quick break right now, and folks, we're going to be right back. You live in London, England now. Tell me the circumstances behind which you had to actually move there.
Sometimes people think I was being dramatic when I said I had to leave the US for safety reasons. I mean, they might not be aware that I nearly died. It took a very long time to get some improvements through various forms of therapies through the hospital. Leading up to the 2019 beating where they punched me repeatedly on the head and face so hard that I was bleeding out from this area under my eyes, bleeding out from my ears, and then bleeding in my brain, which I didn't know at the time. They threw all those drinks on me, and these are the pictures that people see when they first Google. It's me covered in these drinks. That was 2019. 2020, I was undercover and embedded in these riots, and that's how I gathered the field research for most of the material for my book. 2021, I left the country for 6 months. And I thought, maybe it's time to go home. My parents are in Portland. Their health was not great. It was very difficult being away from them. So I went back to Portland, and I thought, maybe I can do more reporting. At that point, I had received a lot of death threats. But for those who are in the public space and they're effective at what they do, particularly when they are good at exposing left-wing extremism, they do get a lot of threats. And at a certain point, it's easy to sort of just accept that as a new normal and not really quite register the severity of the threats. I think that's what happened to me. So in May 2021, I was undercover again in Portland, in downtown. This was a 1-year riot that was organized as an anniversary event for what had happened the year prior. And the group was smaller, and I made a mistake of sticking around. Even though there was probably around 100 people, that's small enough that the organizers within the group could keep an eye out on people who weren't rioting with them. You're there in Black Bloc, but you're not doing anything. Why? There was an Antifa member who had attacked me before, who identified me verbally to others there. So they went up and questioned me. At that point, I was just thinking, how do I get out of this? I was a block from the Central Police Station, but to walk in that direction, I would have had to walk through dozens of Antifa and Black Bloc, and a group of them had come up and asked me who I was. I started walking away. I heard one of them say, "I think it's him." And those feelings that I was having, I had never had that type of feeling of dread before. And I was just wishing and praying in my head that law enforcement were nearby or undercover or around the corner. I'll see a police car, something. Please. And I kept walking, and it was dark. This was 10 p.m. on a Friday night. So the shadows are casted long from the light lamps. And I could see as I was walking away, trying to remain calm. I was still in Black Bloc, covered up, masked. My eyes were covered. I could see the shadows of the group behind me. They were pursuing me. Every business was basically closed. This was a year after the riots that ravaged downtown. I mean, that finished off any businesses that weren't finished off from COVID already. The hotel that was open that I went to, the front doors were locked. Vagrancy had become such a big problem at that point that the hotels in downtown didn't unlock their doors. So the person at the front desk didn't open it for me. And the group caught up, and in one swoop, one of them grabbed at my head and pulled off the sunglasses that I had, the ski goggles actually, and the balaclava, and I was completely exposed. And I took off running. In this video I have shared, it's compiled from multiple surveillance cameras in the city. And you can see me running for my life. I never ran that fast before. I didn't know I could run that fast. And I'm running through downtown, sprinting, screaming for help. And nobody helped. There were people walking around. This was a Friday night, 10 p.m. It's not that late. Cars were in the middle of the road. I ran in the middle of the cars in the streets at the red light, pounding on like windows and cars, asking for help. And when the light turned green, they drove off. And you can see in the video that the group caught up to me and they tackled me to the ground. In that, my weight plus the weight of the person on top of me just shredded the skin on my leg. And then as I tried to get up, some other person ran up in Black Bloc and just kept punching me until I fell to the ground. And then that person held me in a chokehold really hard. And it was seconds in the video. It felt much longer in my mind. Maybe from lack of oxygen, I'm not sure. But that was my one near-death experience. And I was just thinking about my family and those I cared and loved. It was like flashing out, almost like almost how you would see it maybe in a film, like one person after another. And I was like, I'm so sorry that I let you down, that I go out this way. And I could hear like the rest of the Antifa mob catch up. They were running because I sprinted really fast, so they were catching up. I knew if I go unconscious and I'm unconscious on the ground there, that group will kill me. They were wanting my blood for months from all the reporting I did in 2020, all the mugshots I released, all the names, all the charges. They wanted me dead. And before I passed out from being choked, some journalists ran up. They caught up with the group and the person who was holding me in that chokehold. He held me so tight, by the way, that the blood vessels in my eyes burst. I was able to get out of that chokehold and I ran to the next thing I saw, which was the Nines Hotel. And the door I saw was open. So I just ran in and I was like a madman. Barely had my breath. I was just trying to say the words, call police, call police, call police. That's all I could say. And the staff inside the hotel tried to kick me out to the street. And when they said you have to get up, I said no. And I sat on the ground. The only way they were going to get me out was they would have had to carry me out. I was not going to go back out there because the mob now were amassing outside this hotel trying to get in. And the hotel staff refused to call police. And they said, you need to wear a mask. They actually pulled out from their drawer a black COVID mask and said, you need to put this now on. So I'm bloody. I'm out of breath. I'm screaming, call police. I was so lucky. I looked on my body. I had my phone still. I thought that it fell out of my pocket when I was tackled on the ground. I still had it. So I used that to call 911. And the mob gathered outside the hotel, were pounding on the windows, trying to break in. If I didn't escape that area and they got in, they would have finished what they were trying to do. And so there was a hotel guest who was going up the elevator. He was like, I'm getting the hell out of here. There's like this mob outside. And I ran in after him. And I said, please let me go up with you. It was one of those hotel lifts where it requires a card to go up. So I couldn't just push numbers. He said, okay. I went up. And I hid in the hotel. And eventually, finally, a Portland police officer came up to me, escorted me out through this back entrance exit that staff used for the hotel. So the mob wasn't by there. There was an ambulance there. There was a police car by ambulance. And then the police escort behind took me to the hospital, the same hospital that I was treated 2 years earlier. And in there, I saw online, in real time, all the Antifa accounts because they were live streaming outside the hotel. One of the Antifa members, you could see in the video, Andy's in there at Nine's Hotel right now. And she was threatening me. And so they knew I left in an ambulance and they were trying to find out which hospital. So I very narrowly escaped that. I left Portland immediately the next day on a flight. I went from safe house to safe house to safe house until I could arrange where I would go next. And the death threats continued. Nobody was ever arrested over the assault I just described, or the 2019 one, or any of the death threats. And I couldn't stay in the U.S. anymore. I was on borrowed time. You know, even when I traveled to other places, I had been recognized before by hostile people. So I couldn't live in hiding anymore, and it pained me a lot to leave the country that my parents found refuge in. It was a very weird thought in my mind. And yeah, so I'm speaking to you now as somebody who's still essentially in exile for safety reasons. I had this opportunity to speak at the White House at a roundtable about my own experiences and what I've learned and some suggestions I had for the administration. Never thought I'd see that day, because I remember for so long on this Antifa beat, it was like other journalists told me, mentors who I looked to, they said, you should pick a new beat. One, this is really violent. Two, Antifa, it's okay, it's a riot. Like, that happens, that shouldn't be your beat, you know? You should focus on something else. And I'm speaking to you in 2025, many years out from these early days of reporting that I did on Antifa, and you can see the glee that is shown whenever a target on the right suffers violence and or death. We've had 2 assassination attempts on then candidate Donald Trump, and people kind of just gloss over that the first assassination attempt resulted in somebody being shot in the head and dying in front of his family, attending a political rally in the United States, and that 2 other people were critically injured. Like, people just brush over that. Oh, Trump survived it, let's move on. Somebody was murdered there, and 2 people were lucky to survive. 2025 has been particularly violent for the left, and it was cheered on completely. I mean, right now, people are focused on the attacks on ICE because that's directly in front of us. Just a few months ago, Tesla stores were being set on fire, were being shot up. Like, people have forgotten that. Particularly in Portland, there was the Tesla store in Portland 1 had been shot up several times. And to this day, I don't believe the Portland police have arrested a suspect in the Portland incident. A Tesla store in Salem, Oregon was fired upon and set on fire. The suspect apprehended in that, and I was first to report this because the legacy media would not. That suspect's transgender and was part of this radical trans militia type of group. The left is becoming so radicalized, and they're supported by such large mainstream institutions and cultures that people have really normalized that violence and they're okay with it. And that was really the thesis of my book that came out now 4 years ago, Unmasked, that this violence on the left is being mainstream and it's going to have deadly consequences.
If there was one or a couple of things that you would want the average American to know about Antifa that they probably have no idea about right now, what would that be?
I think the question that an average American, and I'm speaking to, let's say, maybe a normie, someone not politically plugged in, or they're liberal, the question you should ask yourself is, when these people claim to be anti-fascist, the follow-up question should be, and in furtherance of what? If you take them at face value, then you have to ask them, you're against this, but what are you for? And what Antifa is for is violence, destruction, murder, and abolishment of the liberal democratic order. So it's quite actually ironic in many ways that Antifa act as shock troops for people who claim to care about those institutions and values and concepts. I would just ask people to, you don't have to listen to my own words, but perhaps watch some of the videos of some of these violence, and you can see how organized it is. Watch that and then ask yourself, what is that in furtherance of?
Well, Andy, no, it's such a pleasure to have had you on again.
My pleasure.
Thank you all for joining Andy, Noah, and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Yanya Kellick.